Is it possible to put up a bunch of Merfolk to out-tempo our opponent and then blow away their whole board with a giant Leviathan Saga creature? Because that is the focus of today's video. Hello my fiery friends, the Infernoman here with the hottest in budget deck technology. And for today's deck tech, we're going to be doing a deep dive, quite literally, into Merfolk once again, with a new twist on it thanks to brand new cards from Final Fantasy breathing brand new life into a unique deck archetype.
Neat!
That's right. So without further ado, join me today in the Pioneer format because we're going to try to summon a bunch of giant ocean creatures to put our opponent in nothing but deep trouble. But before we continue, if you do like any of the content that I do, please like, follow, and subscribe wherever you watch the content. You can support me monthly for a small amount on Patreon, where I have all of my extended bonus footage posted. We also have a Redbubble spot where you can buy merch like stickers and shirts, or for free, all you can just do also is just join our growing community on Discord. Your support helps keep this channel going. All links are in the details below. Longtime viewers of the channel know how we do it. We have to talk about the stats of the deck before we dive right in. So our Pioneer deck today is going to be Mono Blue with an average mana curve about 2.4. We're going to be looking at a total of 20 creatures in the deck, 14 instants, 4 sorceries, 4 enchantments, and 22 lands. Our deck today is actually going to be a hybrid of 2 deck archetypes. We are looking to play a bunch of Merfolk, and we're going to try to out-tempo our opponent with those Merfolk until we can control the whole board. Once we have enough creatures out and enough mana out, we're going to then try to summon a giant octopus utilizing Kiora, the Rising Tide from Foundations, or from the Final Fantasy set, a Saga Leviathan. Literally summon Leviathan to bounce away our entire opponent's board, and once the board is clear of all creatures, we're going to swing in with our deep sea creatures and smash our way to victory. But you may be asking yourself right now, how is it possible to summon giant creatures and out-tempo our opponent while still stalling out the board on such a cheap budget?
Good question.
Well, I'm glad you asked, so let's not waste any more time and let's show you how exactly this deck works. Starting with the creatures in the 2 and 3 drop slot here, we'll utilize Brineborn Cutthroat here, we'll have Floodpits Drowner, and Merfolk Trickster. Each one of these all cost 2 mana, and they also have flash attached to them, so that means you can bring them in at instant speed whenever you are ready to do so. Brineborn Cutthroat is mostly going to be designed as an attacking creature here because it says whenever we cast a spell during an opponent's turn, you get a +1/+1 counter on the creature, so this will be great for us in the early game to just do a lot of damage and put an immediate threat on our opponent. If we need to slow down our opponent in any given way, we can also utilize Floodpits Drowner here. When you flash this in, it also has Vigilance attached to it. When this creature enters, you tap a target creature an opponent controls and put a stun counter on it. And then later on, for the next turn, you can then shuffle this creature, your Floodpits Drowner, and the creature that you tap down with a stun counter back into an opponent's library. So you can kind of just pounce it out of the way and then clear the board to make sure you can keep your attacks going. If we need a little bit more tempo, and depending on how the board state looks, you can also utilize here Merfolk Trickster. When this flashes in, if an opponent's creature gets tapped down with this, it will lose all abilities until end of turn. This can shut down a lot of important abilities that maybe your opponent doesn't want to get shut off to make it easier for us to do our attacks. In terms of the 3-drop part, however, we'll also utilize here Kiora, the Rising Tide. Let's talk about this card for just a moment because it is one of our key pieces to help us with our game plan. Kiora, the Rising Tide is a 3-mana, 3/2 legendary creature, Merfolk Noble. When Kiora enters, draw 2 cards and then discard 2 cards. She also has the Threshold ability, which means that whenever she attacks, if there are at least 7 or more cards in your graveyard, you may cast Scion of the Deep, which is a legendary 8/8 blue octopus creature token. So this is great for us once we get to a certain point in the game where if we want to draw some cards or at least then start summoning a giant octopus to put out a lot of heavy damage very quickly on our opponents. For the non-creature spells that provide us a little bit of extra support, we'll utilize here in the 1-drop slot, consider Surveil 1 and simply draw a card, so this can help us just start digging through our deck. We'll utilize an entire set of Essence Flux here. You can utilize this to exile a creature we control, then return it to the battlefield under our control, and if it's a spirit, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Obviously, none of our creatures are spirits, but we want to use this at instant speed to blink away things that we can quickly just redeploy. And then finally, our only other spell is going to be Baying Veil here. It is technically also a tap land in a pinch, but you ideally want to utilize this to soften up an attack by giving all of our opponent's creatures -2, -0 until end of turn. Well, I guess I should say this is kind of a 1-drop, but not really a 1-drop. It can be whichever. But in any case, we have also 3 steps ahead, which is great for us because this is a very flexible spell. At instant speed, pay 1, and then you have to pay an additional cost depending on how you want to use it. pay 2 to counter a spell, or pay 2 generic to draw 2 cards and discard a card, or pay an additional 3 to create a token of a copy of an artifact or creature we control. At instant speed, that is very valuable for us to sometimes just summon immediately another copy of Merfolk Trickster, Floodpits Drowner, or Brineborn Cutthroat to keep our game plan going. If we don't need to be that super fast, we can also utilize in the 4-drop slot here, Realms Sketching here. So for 4 mana at sorcery speed, you can create a token of a target artifact, creature, or even a land. The card itself is actually pretty solid because you can actually utilize this to pseudo ramp out your game plan, although it's a little bit on the slow side, but it still helps out however you need to. But of course, the real star of the show and the whole reason why we're doing this deck is going to be Summon Leviathan. Although technically this is a creature, it's also a saga, but it does so much for it. So much so, let's talk about this card actually for just a moment to explain why we're even playing this card. Summon Leviathan here is a 6 mana 6/6 enchantment creature / saga Leviathan. It also has Ward 2 for protection. The first part of the saga reads that return each creature that isn't a Kraken, Leviathan, Merfolk, Octopus, or Serpent to an opponent's hand. And the remaining 2 points of the saga read until end of turn, whenever a Kraken, Leviathan, Merfolk, Octopus, or Serpent attacks, draw a card. Keep in mind that trigger will go off for every single creature you have of those card types. So that means you can sometimes refuel very quickly with this card once you have the board state clear. While it is a slow option for us, it actually can do a lot once we stall out the board just long enough to get this card summoned onto the field. As far as the mana base is concerned, it's as simple as can be. We're literally going to be rocking only 22 islands, and the main reason for that is we want to minimize any tap lands because we want to maintain tempo as best as we can. The only exception, as I mentioned earlier in this video, was going to be Bayin Vale / Bayin Coast, where we can use it as a tap land, ideally in the early part of the game. But if you get it later on, you might want to keep it just in case if you want to make sure you can out-tempo your opponent and soften up their attacks. Now, if you do want to take this into best of 3, here's what I would recommend for you for your sideboard. If you're trying to out-tempo your opponent a little bit more, but you need flexibility, we'll bring in You See the Guard Approach. So this is actually a really sweet card for us. You can either use it to tap down a creature and get it out of the way to make sure you have no blockers, or you can give one of your creatures hexproof until end of turn to protect it again from any spot removal. As always, your catch-all for Graveyard Hate will be Soul Guide Lantern, so we'll have 3 copies of that. And as far as trying to mix and match certain types of scenarios here, we'll use Disdainful Stroke here to counter a target spell with a mana value of 4 or greater, or you can bring in Defabricate here to then counter an artifact or enchantment spell and exile it, or you can utilize it to counter a target activated or triggered ability. As far as bouncing away additional things while we're trying to wait for our Leviathan to come out, and in case of that might be a little too slow for us, you can utilize copies of Filter out here to bounce away all non-creature, non-land permanents, so throw away all of their artifacts, enchantments, and planeswalkers back to their hand. Or if your opponent is super aggro and going super wide, you can also bring in Aetherize here to use that instant speed to then bounce back all of their attacking creatures to their hand. Now, as far as the tips and tricks I can give you to get the most value out of the deck, here's what it mostly comes down to. In the early part of the game, you're kind of have to wait it out and just keep playing your lands on curve as much as possible. Once you get to 2 or 3 lands, then you can really start having some fun with your Merfolk, depending on what your opponent is trying to do. If you can tell that your opponent is not going to be very creature heavy, that's when your Brineborn Cutthroat can really shine, because once that comes into play, you're going to then hold up some mana, of course, and then start casting your Considers. You're 3 steps ahead and adjust depending on whatever they try to cast as well. And if they try to get cheeky with you, or if they try to blow stuff away, you have other cards that kind of save it. While you might have to reset the card, for example, utilizing Essence Flux, that card, of course, can still be valuable for you, even if you have to blow away your Brineborn Cutthroat just to fizzle out one of their spells. However, if you do see that they are going to be playing a lot of creatures, that's when your Merfolk Trickster and Floodpits Drowner also get to shine. Keep in mind that when you play these at instant speed on your opponent's turn, your Brineborn Cutthroat again will keep getting bigger and bigger, so all 3 of these Merfolk will synergize very well with the deck. Once you get to the mid-game, your Kiora will start pulling a bunch of cards out of your deck and start dumping the ones you don't need into the graveyard, which will be helpful once we get to the late part of the game, once you can then summon up Scion of the Deep. In a perfect world, Ren Sketching should have no problem making extra copies of your lands, while also you can kind of hold back for a little bit. But remember that because this card is at sorcery speed, it's definitely going to feel very sluggish in this deck, so use it accordingly. But don't forget that if you have to make a copy of a creature at instant speed, 3 steps ahead also can do the job just the same. And once we can stall out to get to the late game, that's when your Leviathan finally will get a chance to shine by blowing away all of your opponent's creatures. This definitely is an extremely powerful spell, especially against decks that have a lot of tokens. Once you get to that second part of the saga, then you can start drawing a ton of extra cards if your Merfolk do manage to survive and refuel your hand to hopefully give you just enough answers to outplay your opponent and score your victory. This will lead us to one of the 3 biggest advantages our deck has, and the first major advantage is majority of our cards have flash attached to them or they're instant speed spells, so we can definitely hold up mana early on just to keep anticipating whatever our opponent plays, and we have to react accordingly. While some players out there may not like that style of gameplay, as a mono blue deck, that definitely gives us a major edge in the mind games we can play with our opponents. This of course will now lead us to the second major advantage our deck has. Since we're playing Merfolk and we're hoping to get bigger creatures out, our opponent probably is not going to be prepared to deal with those giant creatures. Once Kiara is able to start swinging and activate her Threshold ability, Scion of the Deep should not be underestimated, as well as our Leviathan. It may take a while to get those cards up and running, but once your opponent sees that we're actually packing way bigger threats than they may anticipate, then our opponent might have to rethink their game plan as the game progresses further and further. And this will now lead us to the final major advantage our deck has. As long as we can push ourselves into the longer part of the game, we can definitely keep rebuilding faster than our opponent can keep breaking us down. What I mean by that is, even if our opponent anticipates cards such as the Leviathan, or maybe our Scion of the Deep, or a giant Brineborn Cutthroat, your copies of Ren Sketching and 3 Steps Ahead can also make copies of our creatures as well. Remember that Realm Sketching and also 3 Steps Ahead will be able to then get the Leviathan, because it's not just an enchantment, it is a creature. And sometimes when you can then get extra copies of those, your opponent will have no way of getting any defenses down, because we can keep bouncing stuff away with extra copies of our creatures. But of course, it's not all sunshine and rainbows for us. There are going to be 3 major disadvantages this deck has that you really want to acknowledge if you are interested in playing this style of deck. And the first major disadvantage, of course, is we don't have any permanent spot removal. Yes, you can counterspell things such as 3 Steps Ahead. Yes, you can bounce things away with Flip Hits Drowner. But again, these are only temporary things. If, say, like your opponent is trying to throw stuff into the graveyard, or maybe your opponent has their own spot removal, they can definitely blow away our creatures, and we don't really have a way of dealing with those. Whereas ours, while we can get rid of them temporarily, sometimes you do have decks that you may have to face that will just bring them back from the graveyard to the battlefield. Or maybe we can bounce them still into the library, but that eventually means that that card will return at some point where we have to face it yet again. This, in a sense, will lead us to another major disadvantage our deck has. If anything happens to our game plan where we cannot counter their spells, that also makes our deck feel a little sad. Yes, we do have ways of building up creatures so we can start pushing through damage, but if our opponent finds ways of getting around some of our spells, avoiding counter spells by things being uncounterable, or maybe they don't care that we have a giant creature out because maybe they have their own bounce effects, or maybe their own counter spells to counter some of our bigger things, then our deck really feels like we have to rely constantly on our Merfolk, and that sometimes is not going to be enough in order to get your game plan going. And this will now lead us to the final major disadvantage our deck has. We actually are kind of a slow deck, even though I did mention we are using Tempo. The key piece that we want on the field to get to our victory, of course, is the Summon Leviathan. That's literally the whole point of us getting this down. Even if you are trying to rely on Scion of the Deep that Kiora has, it's still only a token, so that can get blown away very quickly. And although Summon Leviathan also has Ward built into it, it still is going to take you at the fastest 5 turns to get to those 5 islands via even just copying it with Realm Sketching in order to get out that Leviathan on time, which in some matchups, especially against hyper-aggressive decks, is not fast enough. Even in a slower matchup with, say, a control deck, you can still cast it for a full price and you may still get counterspelled, which means all of that hard work might be for nothing. But if you're still interested in this deck to archetype and you're interested in taking it to the next level, because maybe you do have a couple extra rares and mythics you want to invest into this deck, then I would definitely say stick around for a couple extra minutes, because if you've made it this far into the video, thank you so much, because you are my true fiery friends, and I'm about to show you how you can take Deep Trouble to the next level. Now, if you're looking to take the deck to the next level, here's what I would recommend for you for those upgrades. So, in the 2-drop slot, we'll now be adding in, instead of Flood Pits Drowner, that gets the boot, and Harbinger of the Tides comes in. While this comes in technically at normal casting speed, you actually can pay it for additional 2 to make it flash it in, and then this means that you can utilize this to bounce back a tapped creature an opponent controls to its owner's hand. So this goes very synergistically with Merfolk Trickster later on into the game. Otherwise, not really too many other crazy changes here. A couple of small nuances here and there. You can keep Ren Sketching if you want to, but Memory Deluge actually provides us a little bit more consistency, because this helps us just dig through our deck to actually get the lands we do need, as opposed to copying them. And more often than not, you might want actually more spells that are more instant speed for faster types of ways of responding, versus just kind of playing things at sorcery speed, which kind of slows down the deck just a little bit. As far as upgrading the mana base, not really anything crazy here either. It's going to be just a simple Otawara Soaring City. Just again, it's just a free roll for us, so why not? And a single copy of Hall of the Storm Giants. If for whatever reason we can't get our Merfolk or our Leviathan to stick around, Hall of the Storm Giants at least can hopefully close out the game if things kind of go southbound. Otherwise, the upgrades for your sideboard also are going to be a little bit more nuanced, but we do have a couple of sweet things for us. So you see the guards approach, keep your filter outs, of course, keep your ether eyes as much as possible. Of course, if you want to change things around, that's up to you, but here's what I would recommend for you. Add in Tishana's Tidebinder here, and we're going to get a whole playset of these instead. This also is a Merfolk that also has Flash, so it goes very well with the deck, but when it enters, you can counter up to one target activated or triggered ability, and if that ability is an artifact, creature, or planeswalker that gets countered, that permanent will lose all abilities as long as this remains on the battlefield. So this is a great way to lock out a lot of select cards to help us ensure we can get our game plan to go off. Otherwise, the other remaining upgrades will be now adding in Reenact the Crime here. This is going to be 2 copies of this at instant speed. You can then exile a non-land card in the graveyard that was put there anywhere this turn. So this is great against Reanimator decks that kind of get a little too cheaty on us. But by doing so, you can then copy the spell, and then you can cast the copy for free. Mill decks have no idea what is going to be coming when you do play this card. And the only other final upgrade will be a simple commit to memory, mostly again, guess for the tempo side of commit. The memory side sometimes comes into play every so often, but realistically, you just want to utilize this to just bounce away a spell that your opponent has on the stack. And with that all out of the way, here are my final thoughts that I want to give you on this deck. While I'm not the biggest fan of Merfolk, I still am a big fan of creature decks overall, but the same issue that I always find with Merfolk is it feels like they're always missing a key piece that really needs to help them push themselves up to a much more stronger level. And by fusing it together with Mono Blue Tempo, with the help of brand new cards from Final Fantasy, I think today we were able to solve that problem and breathe new life into both archetypes in one deck. So, to put this another way, if you're a fan of tempo plays, if you're a fan of countering spells, and if you're a fan of a deck that can very well annoy any opponent whenever you play your spells, then I would definitely say, give this deck a try, and I assure you, when you manage to outplay them with a bunch of flashy Merfolk, you're going to have a lot of fun doing so, and you'll be very surprised at how you can play this off on a budget. And when you finally summon that giant Leviathan to blow away their creatures and make the board clear enough to swing with all of your Merfolk, I assure you, you will definitely not be disappointed. That's all I have for you today. Thanks again for watching, everyone, and just remember that no matter what you do play in the game of life, always be sure to burn bright. Later.